can we get to a point fast enough where we can come up with new battery technology that removes the need for mining in a place like the Congo that has mineral rights controlled by China. What are we discussing today?
Well, we're calling this swimming upstream. There are a lot of automakers out there that have a contrary opinion to perhaps what certain government mandates are or may be, and then there's those in between and those who are following it. And so we wanted to cover that, and then perhaps at the end of this, talk about what we would do.
So let me set the stage with that. And I believe this is an area where you and I are of similar belief, but we have some different directions.
You'd be correct.
So what we're referring to here are EV mandates. Mm-hmm. The car business is one of those businesses that if a politician wants to really push an agenda, a great target is the car industry because it impacts so many other things. That's just a very high level look at it.
It is.
And so what's happened? The EU and Washington, not together, but they do probably collude in this area.
I'm sure they do.
They are saying that all cars sold new need to be EV by 2035. However, a couple of things have changed since they came out with this blanket mandate. Number one, we broke out into war in Europe. So the EU member states, specifically Germany, said, I don't think this is a great idea because we can barely heat the homes of our citizens. How are we going to put all these cars onto an electrical grid that already can't support the volumes you're talking about? So Germany was the first one to blink, go back to Brussels and say, we're no longer supporting this. EU got pissed. And they went back and forth and they realized that they need to somewhat placate the Germans because the Bundesbank is the one that funds the EU.
Precisely.
And they finally went back and forth, and this is, I want to say, about a month ago, they got them to agree and back off of the 2035 EV only. Now a green car in Europe is defined as EV, plug-in hybrid, and hybrid.
Yes.
And then as soon as that agreement with Germany came out, Italy signed on to the German proposal, and then 3 or 4 other EU member states, they signed on. Granted, a lot smaller than Italy, but if I were a betting man, I could see France signing on to the German proposal because they've got the same issue that Germany's got. And this, I know I'm going to get in the weeds of this stuff. Germany just shut down their 3 last nuclear power plants. And one of the big issues with this move to EV, the idea is, and this is where you and I disagree, the quote-unquote climate crisis. Now, I get it. You want to save the planet? No one's going to argue with that. I'm not going to argue with that. But you can't tell me you're going to come out with these cars that plug into a wall and say everything's green and call it a day. Where's the energy being created, or how is the energy being created? Nuclear is a great solution. Not the only solution. And one of the big misnomers that we have is it's a one-size-fits-all situation. All we need is wind and solar. That can't work in certain parts of the world. Hence, nuclear is a good solution. France has proven to be ahead of the curve in that area, but they're all backing off, as I would argue these climate militias are pushing down on these governments to turn off nuclear. So mixed with all of that, you've got Washington saying the same thing, that we need to go 2035. And what's happened now is car manufacturers, some of them are buying, well, maybe buying in is the wrong term there, but they're towing the party line. They're saying, we're going to go all EV by 2035 or 2030.
Somewhere earlier, yeah.
You know, your buddy Joe Biden recently just rolled it back.
My buddy.
Your buddy. 2032 rolled it back. Wants to push it even farther, when the reality is, you and I think most people would agree with this, they're going to have to push these mandates out farther, not bring them in closer. So that's the issue. So there are 2 camps, and let's call them one, the General Motors camp, then we'll call the other one the Toyota camp.
Yes.
Tell us about the General Motors camp.
Okay, the General Motors camp, Mary Barra and her constituents have decided, by the way, he's not my buddy. I hate all politicians. Just to be fair, I hate them all. wants to steer General Motors into an entirely plug-in EV company by 2030. Whether or not it's right doesn't matter right now. This is what they're doing, and they're going to make all of their vehicles, starting with, I believe, Buick. That'll be the first all-electric one, Cadillac, and then Chevrolet. Although, if you were to look at their portfolio right now, the next vehicle that is expected to hit the market and probably be a bit of a success is their Equinox EV, and that's a Chevy. There's one market where that is creating a lot of problems, and it's not the car market, it's the truck market. A lot of people are having some serious issues with that.
You are the expert at trucks. Give me 2 reasons why that's a problem, logistical reasons why it's a problem.
Well, one of them is price, bottom line. Right now, Chevrolet has announced that they're building the Chevrolet Silverado EV. And we are pretty damn sure that the pricing is going to be somewhere in the $70,000 market, maybe a little bit less for their work truck WT version of it, but it's still going to be extraordinarily expensive. But towing and hauling, which is what you do with a pickup truck, those are going to be issues. And there's still issues, and they have been issues. And we've proven that at TFL Truck. Ford has their Lightning EV, and I argued that they did a really good job bringing this thing out, bringing it out fast. And
but they rose the price, what, 10 grand in like 2 months?
Yeah.
But are they making money even with the 10 grand that they've added?
I don't know for sure, because Ford is being very tight-lipped about whether or not they're profiting on their electric vehicles.
A lot of people in the audience probably thinking, well, what do we care if they make money or not? The reason why you care is if a company doesn't make money, it ceases to exist.
Yes.
This almost happened with Porsche in the 90s, and then they made something called the Cayenne that nobody originally thought we wanted. But now the reason why the 992 GT3 is magnificent and has a double wishbone suspension for a race car is because of a Cayenne.
But you could say that across the board with almost every car company, that crossovers, trucks, SUVs have saved their skin. Not a single company exists that is a mass producer.
So what's the risk with the General Motors strategy? How could that bite them in the ass?
Well, for one thing, pricing. It's going to be very difficult for them to maintain affordable pricing, and you cannot build an electric car right now for cheap. Maybe later. There are many things out there right now, many fires that are building in terms of building less expensive, less polluting batteries and all this other stuff. It's happening, but I don't know if it's keeping pace with what their timing is. They want 2030. It's 2023 right now. We've got 7 years. In 7 years, can they build their Ultium or whatever they're going to call it in the future if they change the name? Still, it's a package. Are they going to have that battery package in a vehicle that is affordable to all? And, of course, the most important thing, and this is for all car companies, is will a grid be able to sustain this?
So it's funny you bring that up, because I was just about to butt in, because I would argue what you just brought up is the bigger issue. The profitability will come. As economies of scale play out, they'll get to the point where they can make the $30,000 EV and make money.
Okay.
But there are 3 real, I think, pythons in the closet. Python number 1 is the infrastructure, what you're talking about. Can there be enough charging stations? Not in LA, because we have a lot. And there'll be more in places like LA and New York and Denver.
Yes, of course.
But in Birmingham, Alabama, that's Python number 1. Python number 2, the far bigger issue, is the grid. Can the grid, A, support it, and B, how are you making the energy? Meaning, is it really green? Or are we just moving the tailpipe emissions to the smokestack? And then the bigger issue that no one talks about, national security. Where do the minerals come from that go in the batteries? And can we get to a point fast enough where we can come up with new battery technology that removes the need for mining in a place like the Congo that has mineral rights controlled by China. So you know this about me. I was in the tech world for 15 years.
Yeah.
And specifically, I was in the hardware business, then moved over to the fixed internet, then moved over to the mobile internet. And we moved at a crazy fast pace. I would argue faster than even Hyundai and Kia operate now. But there is no way on God's green earth that the technologies you are talking about will not only be developed, but developed, funded, and get to the point of commercialization by what? We're talking about 12 years. It'll only be a matter of time until Washington rolls them back. And it's not on who's in the White House. It'll just be reality smacking them in the face. Because something I've said to the audience for many years now, with government mandates forcing EV down to the timeline that they're talking about, it's running your life as, don't bother me with the facts, my mind is already made up. Which brings us to the other side of the argument, the Toyota side.
Toyota's point of view is saying, listen, we think that there's a sweet spot here for plug-in hybrids and hybrids where you can have some electric vehicles and then you have these hybrids. If you look at their portfolio right now and what's coming in the future, almost every vehicle they build will have an electrified version of that vehicle, be it a hybrid, a plug-in hybrid, or an all-electric. And their perspective, I personally feel, is the right perspective because they're saying we can make a much more efficient vehicle that's much, much cleaner without having to use all batteries. And they're pushing back on this mandate and they're saying, listen, there's got to be, negotiation here. There's got to be space for negotiation. And I agree with them. And I think because they are one of the largest automakers on the planet, that they will be able to push that mandate back a little bit or at least help it happen.
So I think you're overcomplicating this.
Okay.
I think this comes down to basic economics and the realities of life. I see the Toyota school of thought here as the one that history will look back upon and say this was the right choice. So yes, Toyota has taken a lot of crap in the press, and let's be honest, the kind of folks that do what we do, they're very pro-EV.
Many of them are.
Very pro-EV. Not a lot for the right reasons, but very pro-EVs. And so you got to think about the lens at which the people that are writing about it are talking to you about Toyota.
Yeah.
And what they're doing, they're not seeing the forest for the trees. And they're not seeing that Toyota is a for-profit company. General Motors is a for-profit company. Mercedes AG is a for-profit company. And they realize that if they double down on forget about unproven, but a technology that has many hoops you have to jump through, you have to thread the needle for this to work, and to bet your entire company on the future in the medium term. 2035 is medium term when you're planning.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, to come out with a new car, whether it's electric, gas, a crossover, or a Porsche 992 GT3, $3 billion program. That's what they cost. So if you're going to bet $3 billion on every single car, let's say it's $2 billion if you don't change the platform.
Right.
But whatever it is, a couple of $1 billion, are you going to bet on what politicians are telling you that don't know how to run a business? That's where Toyota is going in the right direction. Now, granted, Akio Toyoda, he's a shrewd dude, man. I'll take my hat off to him because what he did, he's like, I'm taking a lot of heat for this. So you know what? I'm going to stand in the background. I'm going to let this guy who's running Lexus, let him take over, let him take the bullets, and yeah, we'll throw these guys we'll put some chum in the water, and we'll throw them some more battery electric vehicles and show them, yeah, we can make an electric car like nobody's business, as good as, or if not better, than the best of them. Granted, the RZ450E and the BZ4X, not great.
No.
But they weren't trying to make a great car.
No, they were just trying to basically fill a quota.
That's it. But the reality is, they know but what they're doing by saying we are only coming out with these two vehicles, and then everything else is quote unquote electrification. We are banking that the government will have reality hit them in the face, and we're going to have vehicles to sell in 2032 when General Motors won't. And General Motors, I'm going to go back in a little history here. General Motors has made this mistake in the past. Remember when there was the gas crisis in the late 70s and early 80s?
Yes, I do.
A lot of the audience won't, but you will.
I do.
What did GM do? They downsized everything, including Cadillac Sevilles.
Yeah.
And in 1986, they had this crappy Cadillac Seville, and all of a sudden there was no gas crisis. Did anybody buy it? Nobody.
I remember the Cimarron.
The Cimarron. Nobody bought them. They already been through this rodeo, and they're not learning from their history in the past.
Yep.
But then you have other companies that let's call them the Mercedes-Benz path. And I would put BMW, Mercedes, I would argue portions of Volkswagen Group, not all of it, portions of it. where they're like, I'll tell you what, they sit down with the folks in Brussels and they say, yeah, we'll give you your EVs. We're doing all this EV stuff. But the majority of the cars they sell and the ones they have planned for the next 8 years, ICE. Mm-hmm. Why? Because they know that they are going to have to alleviate those mandates, and they want to have a product to sell because they can't keelhaul the entire system on a dime when the government finally wakes up and realizes this can't happen. And let's talk about economics now. They're on the back end making investments into technologies that will make AV work. Not by 2035, but maybe by 2050.
And then you've got Genesis Hyundai and Kia. And they're producing, similar to Mercedes, where they have an answer for every electric car they're building, and they're stepping it up progressively, and they just have tons of investment, so they're able to do this.
But they're still killing it on IC. Like this,
Right.
Have you seen the spy shots of the new Santa Fe?
Looks fantastic.
Looks better than a Range Rover.
Yeah, I was stunned. I mean, they drop the ball from time to time. They have some things that they have to fix, but for the most part, I think that they're doing it right as well. They're in, I would say, the same ballpark as Ford.
Yeah.
Who's just, they figured it out, and they're getting there, they're massing it, and they'll be ready to go. Because at some point in time, there will be a switch that's pulled. It may be 2050, but eventually that switch is going to be pulled, and there's going to be a lot of ICE cars that are no longer produced because they cannot be produced legally.
Again, economies of scale, and I think the Asian manufacturers, I think they're the best at understanding the world is not one size fits all. Like they're still very big on hydrogen, but now they realize, you know what, we're probably not going to get the infrastructure we want. So what they're looking at it is just for logistics, meaning over-the-road trucking, buses, that kind of stuff. There's one big player we're not really delving into, and that's the Volkswagen Group. I feel with them, they are doing more in EV because they're paying a penance for the whole diesel scandal.
All the diesels are gone, EVs are coming, and that's it.
But they still invest in ICE. As a matter of fact, if you think about it, Volkswagen Group is heavily invested in Italy. Mm-hmm. And Italy pushed the EU very hard for a carve-out for low-volume producers to continue to make some sort of ICE car that would maybe have electrification. Translated, Lamborghini and Ferrari.
Right.
And they got it.
Yep.
So here they are saying, we don't so much believe in the EV world for everybody, and they realize it isn't a one-size-fits-all, but their biggest volume brand, Volkswagen, is doubled down like GM on EV, which to me, you got two different strategies inside the same company. I don't see how that's going to play out well.
They didn't have a great start with EV in the United States. I think you and I both agree that the ID4, it's okay at best.
Oh, horrible.
It wasn't a good
the
first
UX
step.
just makes it so terrible.
Right.
The vehicle itself is not bad.
Right. And progressively they will build better and better vehicles. We're going to see the ID7 soon.
Yeah.
And the ID Buzz. And the ID Buzz, I think, will be a hot seller for them.
Okay, so let's move to the point of the discussion. If we were running the show, what would you tell Toyota?
Two things. One, maybe invest, if they haven't already, in those new biofuels that we're starting to hear about that are considered...
Which is what Volkswagen Group is doing.
Exactly.
They just opened up a plant in Chile for synthetic fuels. Fascinated by that.
Yes, and that's a whole discussion in itself. Now, bear in mind, if this works, if these biofuels work, and they can be clean to produce, and that's another part that's very important. You know, you have to make the fuel. If it's clean to make and it's clean to burn, then this whole thing with full electrification, they may be able to pump the brakes on that. There's an awful lot that has to happen.
I want to pick up on that. It's a huge point you're making. I think, forget about everything we just said, economics and the industry and all this kind of stuff. At the end of the day, when someone tries to sell you on, quote unquote, the climate crisis, if the energy you are creating is no different than what we've been doing for years, they're lying to you. That opens us up to a different discussion, which maybe we should have a different episode on. Can you see a world where a place like LA, a place like Denver, a place like London can support an infrastructure that's EV and synthetic fuels and ICE, all living in harmony and all very far down the road where the R&D has been paid off, meaning the economies of scale make them affordable.
Right.
Can you
They have
see
the
that
return on
happening?
their investment. Yes, I do. There is a knee-jerk reaction to anything with internal combustion. That is one side of the party. They absolutely do not want anything that creates any type of waste in their mind.
Don't bother me with the facts. My mind has already made
Right.
up.
Despite everything that it takes to get to that point, they just don't want tailpipe emissions. There's the other side that say, listen, we can make tailpipe emissions very, very clean. And we can produce these vehicles with less penalty than electric vehicles. There's a very small band in the middle. I think I sit in the middle where I think that both can be accomplished.
Okay, so my retort to you is I can see a world where you've got infrastructure, 3 different infrastructures we just discussed, the synthetic, the ICE or gasoline, whatever you want to call it, oil-based, basically petroleum-based, and EV living in harmony, but I don't see them living in harmony in the same region, meaning synthetic may work in South America where you can create it clean. I don't know, but you could.
Yeah, potentially.
I could see EV working in California.
I agree.
I could see natural gas working in the middle part of the country. I can see that. I think it's 50 years off. Now let's turn the conversation. What's the advice you would give to the General Motors strategy of the house?
I think that General Motors seriously needs to think about what's going to happen if things get pushed back. More importantly, they have to think of their customer and what the customer actually wants. Customers currently want pickup trucks, and they want SUVs, and they want crossovers. Are you going to be able to fill that void with electric vehicles that are extremely expensive to build by comparison and actually cover the cost throughout between the consumer and what you guys are developing? I don't think you can right now. In order to fix that, some of those plants need to remain open. Some of those vehicles need to keep being built in order to satisfy them. And by the way, we haven't touched on a major thing, which is diesels. Diesel trucks, diesel pickup trucks, and some SUVs, they're extremely efficient.
That's a discussion.
For a completely different
another
thing.
hour discussion.
Yeah, exactly. So they need to keep building, is what I'm saying.
I would pick up your GM advice side, and this is what I would say to General Motors. You need to play chicken with the U.S. government. You need to stare them down and say, no, this isn't going to work. I'm changing my product plans back to include affordable cars, because at the end of the day, you need to prove to me that these technologies work, and I can be a going concern in 50 years, because if I do what you're telling me right now, I will be out of business in 2033. That is the reality of the situation. But we are just 2 cranky old guys here. Got a cranky old Jew and a cranky old Greek.
That's right.
And we're sitting in a cigar lounge and we're armchair quarterbacks, so we're going to turn this around to the audience.
I'd like to know what you guys think. And more specifically, what do you think it's going to take to make these guys succeed in what they're trying to do? I think that's also part of the point. I mean, we're looking at a crystal ball, but it's a very, very fuzzy crystal ball, and it's not just because of the smoke in the room. So, what is going to happen in the future? We think we have an idea, but maybe you guys have a better idea.
You know what I'm going to add to this? If you had an audience of Washington and Brussels in the room, and you were like, what's your girl, what's her name?
Don't you put me there.
Greta
Oh,
Thunberg.
why do you have
How
to do that?
dare you? If you had the audience that Greta Thunberg had, what would you say to Brussels and Washington? That's what I want to see in the comments.
Okay. Well, and she's not my girl. By the way, I don't hate the kid. I actually admire the fact that she has so much moxie that she's trying to push through something. Look at other kids her age doing nothing. She's at least trying to do something. I'll
My
give her credit.
nephew is like 3 ranks high in the Civil Air Patrol. He's 13. He's killing it.
But come on.
He's a tree hugger from Colorado.
I'm not a guy.
You're not going to listen to this guy. Anyway, we've posed 2, I think, very difficult questions.
Yes.
I'm fascinated to see the comments, and I want you to weigh in the comments and answer some of the comments we get here.
We'll be there.
Because we need to keep this discussion going. So let us know in the comments below or via our social media, MotoMan TV, all one word, MotoMan TV, all one word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with it, I have to say, Lyman suggested I have a Hamlet, a green label Hamlet. It gets better as it goes. To fantastic. You got to try one of these things.
I will indeed.
So once
smells
again,
cool.
a huge thank you to Nancy and Lyman for opening
Thank
their
you.
fantastic lounge to us. And let us know, would you like to see more two cranky old Jewish and Greek guys arguing about politics and how it impacts economics and business around the world? Until we see you in the next episode, bis später.
Ciao.